The rain came down hard that night, the kind that made the streets glisten like shattered glass under the flickering streetlights. In a forgotten corner of Willow Creek, a town the world had long since given up on, a small boy sat by a cracked window, humming softly to himself. The wind howled outside, but his song floated gently through the broken glass, fragile, beautiful, and full of something no storm could drown: hope. His name was Eli Turner. He was 13, though the world had made him grow older than his years. His shoes were torn, his clothes too small, and his dreams too big for the tiny, crumbling house he shared with his mother. Yet even in that poverty, there was a light inside him that refused to die. It flickered in his eyes every time he sang, like a candle against the wind. Eli's mother, Grace, worked at Martha's Diner, a roadside cafe where truckers stopped for coffee and pie on their long, lonely drives. She was a woman whose hands told her story, calloused, cracked, tired. She used to hum when she cooked, back when life still felt kind. But after Eli's father left, the music disappeared from her home. Bills piled up. Dreams turned into survival, but Eli, he still heard it. He heard it in the creak of the floorboards, in the rattle of rain against the window, in the hum of the refrigerator that sometimes stopped working midweek. The world sang to him, quietly, softly, and he sang back. Every night, after finishing his homework under a dim bulb, he'd sit on the windowsill and let his voice rise into the darkness. He sang about everything he couldn't say: the hunger, the loneliness, the love for a mother who never complained, even when her heart broke daily. Sometimes the neighbors heard. They said the boy's voice made the night less empty. Even the stray dogs outside would lie down when Eli sang, as if the music calmed the world for a few moments. One evening, Grace came home later than usual. The diner had been busy, and her feet ached from standing all day. She was soaked, her hair stuck to her face, and her body screamed for rest. But when she opened the door, she froze. There was Eli, sitting in the dark, his eyes closed, his voice floating through the room like light. The candle beside him flickered, and for a second she could almost see his father in his face. The same gentle tilt of the head, the same quiet soul. She didn't speak. She just stood there listening until the last note faded into silence. When he finally noticed her, he smiled shyly. "Sorry, Mama. I didn't hear you come in." Grace's throat tightened. "Don't ever apologize for that, baby. You sing like the world still has something good left in it," he blushed. "You really think so?" "I know so," she whispered. "You sound like a miracle." But miracles were expensive in Willow Creek. The next morning, Grace left early for work, and Eli walked to school with the same second-hand backpack he'd used for years. At school, life wasn't much kinder. The other kids didn't see the music in him. They saw the patched clothes, the worn shoes, the boy who never had lunch money. They called him Hand-Me-Down Eli. They laughed at his dreams, told him people like him didn't make it on TV, that stars were born in cities, not in broken towns like theirs. He never fought back. He just smiled and wrote down lyrics on the back of his math notebook, little pieces of hope he refused to give up. One day, while waiting for his mom after school, he wandered into the empty auditorium. The stage lights were dim, the air heavy with dust. Eli climbed the few steps and stood there, staring into the silence of the room. He imagined an audience, not of people who judged him, but of souls who listened. He closed his eyes and began to sing. His voice filled the empty hall, clear, trembling, untrained, but pure. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He sang about home, about love, about losing everything but still believing you'll find light again. Unbeknownst to him, someone was standing in the doorway, Mr. Daniels. His music teacher, a man who'd once played in a band before life had steered him into teaching, had stopped mid-step. He stood frozen, his hand tightening around the doorframe as the boy's voice echoed around him. When the song ended, Eli turned and gasped, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." "I didn't know anyone," Mr. Daniels raised a hand gently. "Don't apologize, son, that was something extraordinary." Eli blinked. "It was just a song." The teacher shook his head, eyes glistening. No, Eli, that was truth. That was the kind of song people remember long after it ends. That same evening, Mr. Daniels sat in his car long after the last bell had rung. He couldn't shake the sound of that voice. He'd heard hundreds of students sing, but never like that. Never with such raw pain wrapped in beauty. He picked up his phone and called an old friend who worked as a junior talent scout for a national show called Star Voices. "I've got something for you," he said, voice trembling slightly. "A kid, no training, no money. But if you hear him, you'll understand." The next day, Eli came home to find his mom holding a letter. Her eyes were wide, her hands shaking. "Eli," she said softly, "someone wants you to audition. In the city." He froze. "Me?" She nodded. "You, baby. For Star Voices." He laughed nervously. That's impossible. We don't have money for that, Mama. The bus ticket alone." Grace held up her hand. "Don't you worry about that. I'll find a way." And she did. She picked up extra shifts, cleaned houses on Sundays, even sold her wedding ring and her mother's locket, the one she swore she'd never part with. When Eli found out, he cried, "Mama, you shouldn't have done that." She smiled weakly, wiping his tears. "That ring's just metal, baby. But your dream? That's something eternal." The night before they left, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the stars blink through the fog. He whispered quietly, "Please, if there's anyone up there listening, don't let me fail her." Grace, half asleep on the couch, heard him. She didn't move, just let silent tears fall, knowing her boy's heart was bigger than his fear. The morning came cold and gray. They stood at the bus stop, wrapped in one thin coat they took turns wearing. The bus groaned as it pulled up, and Grace kissed her son's forehead. "Promise me," she said, voice breaking. "You'll sing the way you do here. Don't sing to win, Eli. Sing to heal. Sing for those who can't." He nodded, eyes shining. "I will, Mama, I promise." The ride to the city felt endless. Eli pressed his face to the window, watching the trees blur into highways and skyscrapers. He'd never seen so many lights, so many people, so much noise. He clutched his mother's hand the whole way. When they finally reached the theater, the line of contestants snaked around the building, hundreds of kids with fancy clothes, stylists, guitars, and confident smiles. Eli stared down at his frayed shirt and torn shoes. His stomach tightened. One girl nearby whispered to her friend, "He doesn't look like competition." Eli heard it but said nothing. Grace squeezed his shoulder. "They don't see what I see," she whispered. "But they will." Hours passed before it was his turn. The judges looked tired, scrolling through notes, sipping coffee, unmoved. Eli stepped onto the stage, trembling. The spotlight felt too bright, too heavy. "Name?" asked the lead judge without looking up. "Eli Turner, sir," he stammered. "And what will you be singing?" It's a song I wrote. For my mom." The judges exchanged a quick glance. Another homemade tune from a nervous kid. The audience murmured. A few people looked bored already, but then he began to sing. At first, it was a whisper, a single note, thin and hesitant, hanging in the air like a question. But then the tremble faded. His voice grew stronger, rounder, filled with something ancient, grief, love, hope, all tangled together. He sang of long nights in small houses, of mothers who never stopped believing, of broken people finding light in the cracks. Every word trembled with honesty. Every note felt like it came from the soul of a child who had seen both heaven and heartbreak. The audience went silent. Even the judges leaned forward, their pens forgotten. One of them, a woman known for her harsh criticism, felt her throat close up. By the final chorus, Eli's voice cracked with emotion, but instead of breaking the moment, it made it real, raw and unforgettable. When the last note faded, he looked down, clutching the microphone, afraid to look up. Then, nothing, no sound, no movement, until someone stood. Then another. Then the whole room rose to their feet. Clapping, cheering, shouting his name, Eli looked up, eyes wide, and saw tears streaming down the faces of the judges. The lead judge whispered, voice shaking, "Eli Turner. You just reminded us why music exists." Grace, standing behind the curtain, covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing. She had never seen so many people moved by her boy's voice. Eli stood there, frozen, overwhelmed. For the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't just singing, he was healing people. For days after that performance, the world seemed to move in slow motion for Eli Turner. One moment, he was a small-town boy singing in the shadows of a broken home. The next, his face was everywhere. News channels replayed his audition clip again and again. Headlines read, "The boy who made judges cry, the voice that stopped a nation." But fame, as beautiful as it looked, came with a kind of noise Eli wasn't used to. When the show called him back for the semifinals, Willow Creek exploded with pride. People who had once mocked his patched clothes now claimed they'd always known he'd be a star. The old diner where his mom worked hung a poster with his picture in the window. "Our Eli, making Willow Creek proud," Grace cried when she saw it. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. But fame doesn't just bring applause. It brings expectations, and those can be heavier than hunger. The city felt colder this time. Bright lights, cameras, interviews, stylists, people everywhere telling Eli what to wear, what to say, what to sing. He missed the silence of home, the way his mother's hand fit around his when they prayed at night. He remembered what the head judge told him after the audition. "You have a gift that can change lives." Those words echoed in his head. He wanted to believe them. But somewhere between the stage lights and the headlines, that gift started to feel like a burden. During rehearsals, the producers tried to push him toward a commercial pop song. "This is what sells." "Kid," one said, tapping his clipboard, "keep it upbeat. You want people dancing, not crying." Eli shook his head. "But that's not me. I sing stories, not slogans," the producer sighed, frustrated. "You're new. Learn to play the game." For a moment, the boy who had once sung from his heart began to doubt it. Maybe they were right. Maybe people didn't want truth. They wanted rhythm and flash. That night, he sat alone backstage, holding his mother's old locket, the one she had pawned so he could come here. She'd gotten it back after his audition aired. Strangers from across the country had sent donations to help them. But to Eli, it wasn't about money. It was about why he sang. He whispered to himself, "Don't forget who you are, Eli. Don't sing to impress. Sing to heal." The semifinal performance arrived. The stage was massive, a golden glow of lights, smoke, and screaming fans. The judges sat ready, thousands of people watching live. Eli took a deep breath, heart pounding. The host announced, "Next up, the boy who made us cry, Eli Turner." As the spotlight found him, he felt a wave of warmth. Not fear this time, but gratitude. He glanced toward the crowd where his mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight. The music began. This time, he didn't choose the producer's song. He chose his own, "The Road Home," a song he'd written after his father left. It was about forgiveness, not anger, about learning to let go of pain and love anyway. Each word came from a place deeper than memory, a place only those who've lost something precious can reach. The melody rose and fell like a heartbeat, trembling with the ache of every goodbye he'd ever lived through. By the end, even before the last note faded, the audience was on its feet again. Tears rolled down faces, not because the song was sad, but because it felt real. The judges didn't even wait for the music to stop. One of them stood, clapping through tears. Another said, voice cracking, "Eli, there are singers, and then there are souls who turn their pain into something holy. You're the latter." After the show, his phone buzzed nonstop. Thousands of messages poured in from around the world. A soldier in Afghanistan wrote, "Your song reminded me of home. Thank you." A mother from Chicago. "My son passed away last year. Your voice made me feel like I could breathe again." A blind girl from Texas. "I can't see you, but I can feel you in every note." Eli read each message slowly, tears falling onto the screen. He realized that his music had reached places he'd never even been. Hospital rooms, lonely hearts, empty houses, places where people needed a reason to keep going. And yet, inside him, something still ached. Fame changed everything around him, except him. But it started to change how people saw him. Kids at school who had once ignored him now called daily, asking to hang out. Old teachers wanted selfies. Brands wanted to use his face for ads. Grace worried. She could see the tiredness in his eyes. The way he smiled for cameras but fell silent when the lights went off. One night, she found him sitting on the balcony of their small rented apartment in the city. Knees pulled to his chest. She touched his shoulder gently. "What's wrong, baby?" He looked at her, eyes heavy. "Mama, everyone says I made the judges cry. But what if I can't do it again? What if that was just luck?" Grace smiled softly and sat beside him. "Eli, tears don't come from notes. They come from truth. And you've got more truth in your little heart than most people have in a lifetime." He leaned his head on her shoulder. "What if I disappoint them?" She kissed his forehead. "Then you remind them you're human. And that's enough." But the real test was yet to come. For the final round, the show announced a theme, a song that defines you. Every contestant scrambled for grand productions. Backing dancers, fireworks, everything to impress the crowd. Eli, however, went the other way. He sat in his hotel room for hours, staring at his notebook. He wanted something honest. Something that wasn't about fame or sorrow, but love. The kind of love that sacrifices everything quietly, like his mother's. And then it came to him, a melody, a story. He called it "The One Who Stayed." It wasn't just a song. It was a thank you. To Grace. To every parent who had ever given up their own dreams so their children could chase theirs. He wrote through the night, tears dripping onto the page. When the dawn came, the lyrics shone like a confession. "You worked through the pain, so I could stand in the light. You stayed when the world walked away. You gave up your song, so I could sing mine." The night of the finale, the air buzzed with electricity. Backstage, contestants rehearsed, stylists rushed, cameras flashed. Eli stood quietly in a corner holding his mother's hand. She was wearing a simple blue dress, one a stranger had mailed her after watching his audition on TV. He whispered, "This one's for you." She smiled, eyes full of pride and worry. "It always has been, sweetheart." When his turn came, the stage fell silent. No dancers, no instruments. Just one boy, one microphone, and a single beam of golden light. He began softly, voice trembling at first, then growing steady, tender, powerful. His words painted a portrait of love so pure that even the camera crew forgot to move. Grace listened from the wings, clutching her heart, unable to stop crying. By the final verse, the entire arena was standing. Some audience members held their phones high, lights twinkling like stars. Eli sang the last line. "You gave up your song so I could sing mine." And his voice cracked just slightly. That crack broke the world open. The judges were sobbing openly. The host could barely speak. Even people watching at home said later that they cried without knowing why. When the applause finally came, it sounded endless, waves and waves of sound crashing like the ocean. Eli just stood there, looking at his mother, whispering, "We did it, Mama." She nodded through tears. "No, baby. You did it, but you carried my heart with you." That night, he didn't win the trophy. Another contestant took home the title, but it didn't matter. The next morning, every newspaper headline, every social media post, every radio host was talking about him. The boy who didn't need fireworks to light the stage. The boy who made judges cry again. The boy who sang with his soul. And for Eli, that was the only victory that mattered. But deep inside, something had changed. He wasn't the scared boy from Willow Creek anymore. He had seen a world beyond poverty and pain, and he had learned that the real power of music wasn't in fame or applause. It was in the quiet moments when someone, somewhere, whispered, "Because of your song, I didn't give up." Years passed. The lights of the Star Voices stage had long dimmed, and the roar of the crowd had faded into memory. But for Eli Turner, the echo of that music never stopped. He was 24 now, taller, older, his voice deeper, but still, carrying the same fragile tenderness that once made the world stop and listen. He had traveled across countries, performed in grand halls, sung for presidents, kings, and crowds of thousands. His albums went platinum. His songs played in cars, hospitals, schools, and quiet living rooms where people found comfort in the softness of his tone. Yet, despite the fame, the awards, and the spotlight, Eli never forgot where it began. That tiny house in Willow Creek, the cracked window, and his mother's tired smile in the candlelight. Because that was where his real music lived. Grace still worked part-time at the diner, not because she had to, but because she loved it. She said the smell of coffee and the chatter of people reminded her of the life they'd built from nothing. Every wall of their new home was covered with photos, Eli's concerts, the audition stage, letters from fans. But her favorite picture was still the old one, little Eli sitting by the window, barefoot, singing to the rain. Whenever reporters asked Eli what his greatest achievement was, he'd always say, "Making my mama proud." And he had. But life, like music, has quiet notes between the melodies, moments that test even the strongest hearts. One winter evening, Eli got a call from home. His mother had fallen ill. He rushed back to Willow Creek immediately, leaving a sold-out concert tour midway. The doctors were kind but gentle in their truth. Grace's heart was weak. Years of overwork and exhaustion had caught up with her. When Eli entered the hospital room, she smiled faintly, her face pale but peaceful. "You look tired, baby," she whispered. "Always running, always singing for the world." He took her hand. "None of it matters if you're not there to hear me, Mama," she chuckled softly. "Oh, I'll always hear you, even when you think I can't." He tried to smile, but tears rolled silently down his cheeks. She brushed them away with trembling fingers. "Do you remember what I told you before your first audition?" He nodded. "Sing for those who can't." Her voice cracked as she said, "Then promise me you'll keep doing that, even when I'm gone." Eli broke down, holding her hand against his heart. "I promise, Mama. I'll keep singing. For you." That winter was long and cruel. And when spring came, Grace didn't. The whole town of Willow Creek attended her funeral. There were no fancy flowers, no gold caskets, just simple white lilies and the sound of rain tapping gently against the church roof. Eli stood at the front clutching his guitar, unable to speak at first. The people waited, hundreds of them, fans, friends, strangers who had once been touched by his songs. He finally looked up and said softly, "Every note I ever sang came from her. So today, I'll sing her favorite one." And there, under the dim church lights, he began to play "The One Who Stayed." His voice broke on the first line, but he didn't stop. He let the tears fall, his pain pouring into every note, his voice trembling but full of love. When he finished, even the sky seemed to cry with him. Months passed. Eli disappeared from the spotlight. Rumors spread. Some said he'd quit music forever. Others said he'd gone abroad to heal. The truth was simpler. He'd gone home. He sold his mansion, donated his awards, and returned to Willow Creek. Not as a star, but as a son keeping a promise. He built something there. The Grace Foundation for Music and Hope. A small community center for children who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. The same kind of children he'd once been. Every morning he taught them to sing, not to become famous, but to feel, to heal. He'd say, "Music isn't about perfection. It's about telling the truth, even when it hurts." And when one shy little girl asked him, "Mr. Eli, how do you know when a song is good?" He smiled and replied, "When it makes someone cry. Not because they're sad, but because they remember they're alive." Years went by and the Grace Foundation grew. Reporters sometimes came to film documentaries about the boy who made judges cry, who now lived like an ordinary man in his hometown. They expected to find a broken artist, but what they found was peace. Eli would sit on the same old wooden porch his mother once swept, teaching kids guitar chords, humming softly as the sun dipped low. He no longer chased applause. He chased connection. And one day, when a young boy with trembling hands asked him, "Mr. Eli, why do you still sing when you've already done everything?" Eli looked at him, smiled, and said, "Because somewhere, there's still someone who needs to hear that they're not alone." One summer evening, a producer from Star Voices called him again. They were celebrating their 20th anniversary and wanted Eli to return, not as a contestant, but as a guest performer. At first, he refused. He said he had nothing left to prove, but when he looked around at his students, their eager eyes, their dreams waiting to bloom, he realized this wasn't about him anymore. He said yes. The night of the live broadcast arrived, the same stage 2 decades later. But now he was the one others looked up to. His hair had a touch of silver. His voice was deeper, roughened by time, but still warm like a candle in the dark. When he stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted in cheers. The host smiled, almost emotional. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back the boy who once made the world cry. Now a man who makes it believe again, Eli Turner." He smiled humbly, eyes glistening under the lights. Then he began to sing. The song was new, but it carried echoes of everything he'd lived. The hunger, the hope, the promise, the loss. It was called "The Song That Never Faded." As he sang, the cameras cut to the audience, people wiping tears, holding hands, smiling through their pain. And at one point, Eli looked up, and for a split second, he could almost see her, his mother, standing at the back of the hall, just like she did all those years ago. Smiling, proud, radiant. He didn't stop singing. He sang harder, because he knew she was hearing him. When the final note rang out, the entire room stood as one, not out of pity or nostalgia, but because they knew they had just witnessed something holy. And as the applause thundered, Eli whispered under his breath, "For you, Mama. Always for you." That night, the clip went viral again, decades after his first audition. Comments flooded the internet. His voice still heals. You can feel his soul in every word. I watched with my daughter. We both cried. And among the millions of views, one stood out. A young girl from a small town wrote, "My mom works in a diner. We don't have much. But when I hear Eli Turner sing, I believe we can still have a tomorrow." Eli saw that comment and smiled, because he knew that's where it began, and that's where it would always begin again. The next morning, he walked. Through Willow Creek, the sun rising over the same roads he'd once walked barefoot. Children waved to him as he passed the music center. Birds sang in the distance. He sat on the porch, guitar in hand, and began to hum softly. Not for fame, not for glory, but for peace. The world might forget names, he thought, but it never forgets a song that makes it feel again. And as the wind carried his melody through the quiet streets, it was as if the whole town paused to listen. Just like that first night by the window, when a boy sang against the storm. Epilogue that evening, the sun dipped low behind Willow Creek, painting the sky gold. Inside the music center, a small plaque hung on the wall. It read, "Dedicated to Grace Turner, who taught the world that sometimes love itself is the greatest song ever sung." Beneath it, a framed photo of a young boy with a shy smile, holding a microphone in trembling hands, and the caption, "The boy who made judges cry with every note." And though the years would pass, though faces and voices would change, the song, his song, would never fade. Because Eli had done what his mother always wanted. He didn't just sing to be heard, he sang to heal the world. The Boy Who made judges cry with every note. A story about love, loss, music, and the kind of hope that never dies.